Hey everyone, welcome back to another review, and this time we're talking about Iron Man number 37 through 49, which is the 12-issue run, or, well, 13 technically, the 13-issue run that Frank Tieri did on Iron Man after he finished co-plotting the Sons of Yinsen stuff with Joe Quesada. Now, this can be broken down into three distinct parts, and they progressively get worse. And that's not to discount him as a writer, and we'll talk about this, because what's interesting about the Quesada run is that when Quesada was on his own, he wrote a really interesting, really good story that had issues, but was still really interesting. And then when Tieri came along and started scripting and co-plotting with him, everything went downhill, but I'm still convinced that the idea was Quesada's, just with the way he talks about Iron Man's origin and John Byrne and such. So, Tieri's the guy, because even if the idea was bad, if Tieri was a good writer, then that would lead you to believe, well, okay, the dumb concept could have been salvaged with good writing, but it was written horribly. So, that would lead you to believe that the quality of the second half of Quesada's Iron Man run was weighed down by Frank Tieri as a writer. So, you would go into his run expecting it to be just bad. When in actuality, the first part of his run, Remote Control, is really good. Then Big Bang Theory is just okay. And then the Frankenstein syndrome is awful. So, we'll go ahead and get into each one of these parts. So, the first one, Remote Control, is a story arc where essentially we found the original idea that Jeff Loeb ripped Batman Hush off of. Batman Hush is just Iron Man, the Remote Control story arc. That's really all it is. Right down to the weird retroactive details and origin and all that. So, the whole idea behind Remote Control is that Tony Stark has a friend since childhood that we just conveniently never knew about that's back in town now, whose name is Ty Stone. And Ty Stone and Tony were friends that were constantly trying to outdo each other in sports, in academics, in women, all of it. They were always number one and number two with each other. And he's back in town now and is Fortune 500's number one company. And Tony's at number two. And so that kind of reignites their friendship. But he's a media mogul, so he just recently acquired this massive media franchise of magazines, radio, television, the works. And the first issue ends with him getting Tony's girlfriend, Rumiko Fujikawa. And Rumiko has been horrible for the entire Quesada run, and now she's just a non-entity, and she means nothing. She's just kind of there to add to the set dressing of the Ty-Tony Stark relationship, which is part of the problem here. But now Ty seems like he's on top, and then Tony has to deal with fallout from everything he's ever had done in the past. So the thing from the Michelini-Leighton run, where Iron Man's armor was hacked by, not by Obvious, by Justin Hammer, and killed a diplomat, that's back here. And the thing that Tony was shot and paralyzed by what's her name, Kathleen Dare, that Tony's armor was responsible for killing Whiplash, that the entire town that the Ego, the Living Planet Spore has created is completely off the map, and so the entire first story becomes about how, wait a second, maybe Tony Stark and Iron Man are bad people. Maybe they're not heroes. Maybe they're just throwing false allegation after false allegation, and part of this comes from this other company that Tony ran into with the sentient armor in the previous run. And the sentient armor and Tony go to this guy who owns a company who that Whiplash gave up. That Whiplash said, this is the guy that paid me. And so Tony goes and talks to him and finds out that he's not. But after that point, we find out, the media finds out that Whiplash was killed by Iron Man, and so they start running with this. And that businessman has been known to be corrupt and has a horrible reputation. And so the footage of him and Tony together and any sort of communication they may have had starts to smear Tony. And then it basically becomes about the public revolting against Iron Man and revolting against Tony, and Tony having to give under the pressure. All this while Ty Stone he sees as his best friend. And progressively we find out that Ty Stone's parents died just a little bit after Tony Stark's parents died. And so they were kindred spirits. And then he goes overseas and it doesn't come back for a while. And then we find out that along the way here that Ty Stone has been manipulating these events to the very beginning. He has this invention called Dream Vision, which is basically a virtual reality where you plug into it and you're able to like live out fantasies. Like you want to be part of the shootout in Good, Bad, and the Ugly, you can do it. And this is the invention he's using to help slowly take out Tony Stark. And we find out here that both Howard Stark and Ty Stone's parents were in competition with each other. But Ty Stone's father wasn't necessarily a great businessman, and so his company was slowly weakening, and then Howard Stark was able to use that to drive him out of business. And so Tony thinks that this is all some kind of misguided form of revenge for what happened to his father. But what we find out along the way is that no, it's not. It's that this kid's a psychopath. That this kid was constantly annoyed at coming in number 2 to Tony, which wasn't even a constantly, it was a back and forth thing. He was just angry every time Tony came in first. And so after Tony's parents died, he was jealous of the fact that Tony would inherit his company first. And so he would have a leg up on Ty for a few years. And so Ty sabotages the car and kills both of his parents. And then you see the Batman Hush correlation here. A lot of this is just Batman Hush, but repackaged differently, and it's interesting that the similarities are there as much as they are, especially considering a lot of people just consider Iron Man Batman in armor, which he's not, but, it's interesting they have that connection. So then we find out that Ty Stone is the psychopath, and it's in the span of one issue that we get 3 separate motivations for Ty Stone before we're landing on who he is, and the entire arc is actually framed in this interesting, every issue opens with Tony in the middle of a gunfight progressively finding his way up to a tower, and then flashing back to how he eventually got there. And what you find out in the final issue is that he's actually been sucked into Dream Vision by Ty Stone. And Tony has to fight Ty Stone off, and all he's got at this point is the red and gold armor. And there's lots of interesting commentary being done on the fact that Tony's armor is older, it doesn't work as quickly, that his mind is processing things differently, and this armor isn't as accommodating as what Tony's has become used to, and so it's a very different sort of function for him to fight with an armor, and it's really just a suit. That it's got some interesting features, but it's really just a suit, and it's more of him in the battle as opposed to the technology. So Tony and Ty go back and forth, and eventually, despite Tony's name being run through the mud, he's able to prove that Ty Stone, not prove, but he's able to pin Ty Stone down and win, and then Ty Stone blames it all on on one of his media companies, who conveniently dies in an attack that he orchestrated by Radioactive Man. And so Ty Stone now has Tony's girlfriend. He acts like Tony's spite for him in the public is just Tony being a bad person, and now he's completely safe and able to do what he wants, despite the fact that Tony survives his encounter in Dream Vision. And then the next story arc opens with a little bit of Ty, which is called The Big Bang Theory. And the Big Bang Theory story arc is all about how Tony, dealing with the fallout of what happened with Ty Stone, is now hated by everyone. And so he just decides, you know what, I'm not going to be Tony Stark anymore, because no one would care if Tony Stark disappeared. And so he just gives all of his money away and his companies away to the Avengers and the Maria Stark Foundation, lets Pepper and Foggy run everything, and then just goes underground and has Rhodey come up with a secret identity for him and just works at a different company. And while he's working at Askew Technology, actually, while he's working at Askew Technology, he's working with them secretly as Iron Man to use their skin technology to come up with a new armor design. And so while he's doing this, we find out that Ty Stone has actually used Dream Vision and subliminal messaging to make Tony think that he wants to give all this up. And so by the end of this, he realizes that that's what's actually happened. And the businessman that Tony dealt with in the previous arc, that Ty Stone pinned everything on, reveals that Ty Stone made it so that he is going to die slowly, and so now that he's dead, he's leaving all of his money and his wealth to Tony Stark in order to combat Ty Stone. And so Tony gets wealth back that way, and then comes back as Iron Man and Tony Stark in the public eye, and saves Askew Technology after it was attacked by one of Ty Stone, by Hydra, actually, not Hydra. Sorry, when it was attacked by MODOK and the Ghost. And so after that, the final arc is more Sons of Yinsen stuff that reveals some of the history behind the sentient armor, has Yinsen's brain in a jar taking over the sentient armor, and realizing that all this was orchestrated by Ultron. So that's a lot, and we will unpackage it beat by beat. So the Ty Stone stuff I already kind of talked about. That stuff is actually really good. That first arc, that first whole idea of the remote control arc is actually really good. I love it. I think there's some really interesting ideas there. It is playing on all of Tony Stark's history. It is going back to some more of the manic depressant stuff. And there's moments here where Tony is just getting closer and closer into alcoholism again. And there's a moment in the Joe Quesada run that I forgot to mention that I think is absolutely genius, where Tony's just having a crappy day and he's about to drink water, and then he spits it out because in his mind he was expecting that to taste like scotch. And so very slowly Tony's getting closer and closer, diving back into alcoholism. And he's not there yet, but this is again just trying to break him as much as possible, and I really like that. And then the next arc after Remote Control, the Big Bang Theory, is kind of a mixed bag, because by the end of the arc, it's revealed, people like Rhodey say that Tony's been acting out of character, but at least for me, it doesn't feel like Tony's acting out of character. It feels like a natural progression. It feels like that's something Tony would do. It's kind of consistent with the Tony Stark that eventually just became a homeless person in the Dennis O'Neil run. So I don't really see it as out of character, but part of it's because Frank Tieri is writing a different kind of Tony. Tony, more historically, has kind of come to this point where business is a game to him. That business is, his mind constantly needs a challenge. He's an addictive personality and is a manic depressant. And the constant back and forth that business creates is the only thing that keeps his mind running. And Frank Tieri is writing him more as classic businessman, venture capitalist, or robber baron, depending on how you want to characterize it. And that's partly what the disconnect is, that Frank Tieri is not really introducing that idea early on enough. And so Tony giving everything up is supposed to be this big dramatic moment of, oh my god, Tony is just become a different person now, both literally and figuratively. But he's kind of not. He's kind of become an extension of what used to be. The book suddenly becomes about like working people and that kind of trouble, and Tony being unable to relate to common people, and him having to give up his status of privilege. But it very quickly becomes clear that the writer is thinking of this as a different kind of Tony Stark than the one we're used to. And Tony's progression through all of the companies he's lost up to Stark Solutions is very different than what Frank Tieri has ultimately made him do by the end of this. By the end of the Big Bang Theory arc, Tony discovers that all of these companies are being bombed by MODOK and the Ghost, and he stops them, and it's through that that he's able to help with the companies that have been hopelessly damaged by MODOK. And he realizes that Iron Man and Tony Stark both have a place in society, because Tony Stark's wealth is part of why he's able to help so many people. That his foundations and his business gains are ways of keeping people off the streets and working within a bad system. And that's interesting. The problem, though, is Tony here, the way Frank Tieri writes him, is that Tony never really believed in the idea of Stark Solutions, that he's a creative, not a consultant. And I don't know how much I like that, because we started with Stark Industries, and Stark Industries eventually was taken over after Tony went on his horrible alcoholic binge. Was taken over by Stain and became not Industry. Sorry, it was Stark International becomes Stain International, and Stain International dominates for a while. And then Tony, after he recovers from some of his drunken adventures, goes with Rhodey and some other people and starts Stark Enterprises. And then after a while, Stark Enterprises acquires Stain International. And then Stark Enterprises eventually goes away, and we get to the thing where Tony dies in Heroes Reborn and then comes back, and then Stark gets absorbed into Fujikawa and becomes Stark Fujikawa, and Tony opens Stark Solutions. And the whole idea behind Stark Solutions is Tony wanting to be more social, wanting him to be more among the people, and wanting to use wealth as nothing but as a means to help people that are disadvantaged. And Stark Solutions was a very natural growth of who he became as a person, where Tony Stark, the businessman, slowly started being replaced by Iron Man, the hero, and Tony Stark started embodying more of the heroic ideas. And so him giving up Stark Solutions and Frank Tieri saying that Stark Solutions was never really in character with Tony just kind of rubs me the wrong way. And I feel like he's not doing enough, because it wouldn't bother me if we had more of an arc establishing that Frank Tieri's Iron Man is a different kind of person. And so without that, it just feels kind of jarring. And so he does that, and at the end of the Big Bang arc, he says he's going to go back and acquire Stark Fujikawa. And part of the problem here is he's going to attack it more backhandedly. He, in the next issue, says that we're trying to dig up dirt on them, and the only way to take over them now, because they don't have any dirt, is to just go with hostile takeover. And one, no matter what kind of Tony Stark you're writing, that is not Tony's character. And two, the whole point of Stark Solutions being developed was that Tony could have had Stark Fujikawa back at any time he wanted. The entire first few issues of Kurt Busiek's run mentions that because Tony was thought dead but just trapped in a different dimension and all the crap that happened with Heroes Reborn, he has a legal right to get his company back. And so, just because he decides not to at that moment, doesn't mean in this later moment where he reverses his decision that he isn't able to just get it back through legal channels. But, even more than that, Tony deciding to take Stark Fujikawa back as a statement of his dominance as a businessman is just not Tony Stark. Tony Stark is not that kind of person. Tony Stark is not spiteful. He's not a robber baron capitalist. Tony Stark is a guy that has accumulated his wealth mostly as a result of his massive character defects and his need to constantly play games and challenge himself. He is too much about helping every little person that it ultimately hurts him. And the idea that he would just go after a company like that isn't in his character. He didn't do it with Stain International. He didn't take that company back. It's completely flies in the face of who Tony is to reverse that decision in the first place. And then even more than that, add insult to injury, but saying that he's looking for dirt in this company to blackmail it and get it back, and talking about a hostile to take over. Like, it's just not in Tony's character. It just makes him a horrible person, and I don't understand why he felt the need to write him that way. And I can see the idea, because for me, Tony Stark's always been written as he's characterized as the ultimate virtues and the ultimate evils of capitalism all rolled into one, and his constant manic depressive behavior is reflective of the state of what capitalism does to a society. And so you can write Tony as more of a clear capitalist if you want to. The issue is you've turned him into a power-hungry businessman, and he's not that. He is not power-hungry. Business is a challenge to him. Business is a sport to him. And to ignore that, I don't like it. And then all of that's interrupted, and we never resolve it because the Sons of Yinsen show up. And the Sons of Yinsen show up integrating into the world instead of being isolationist, and attack Tony. And there's this whole contrived thing where the previous head monk is framed for something, and Tony and him were helping to stop the new revived Yinsen and all that. It's a very badly written story. It's very contrived, but what it does is that it reveals that the Ultron Imperative from the previous Avengers story, the Ultron Imperative is this idea that every scrap of technology Ultron creates is secretly programmed with the need, the desire to ultimately build another Ultron. And so Jocasta being downloaded into the armor and then into Tony's computer is what caused the safe armor to eventually become sentient, because it was infected with Ultron. But being struck by lightning and the damage on my whiplash accelerated the process, and so it became more of a replicant of early Ultron, where Ultron was in love with Hank Pym, where this armor was in love with Tony Stark, and so it became like more of a child Ultron. And now Ultron has fully taken over the armor and is using the Sons of Yinsen and the skin technology to basically take over the world, and Tony and the previous head monk, Sun Tao, are trying to stop them and sort of save Yinsen's name, because Yinsen's brain was put into this armor and it's making the monks think that Ultron is actually just Yinsen. And the event, Tony's able to stop Ultron ultimately, but we do this horrible thing here where we do this absolutely terrible rape allegory with Jocasta. We insert this scene where Jocasta, when being left alone with the sentient armor, was basically digitally raped by it. And that's just, it's horribly insulting. It's not in any way meaningful. It's completely shock value, and it's completely rewriting who Jocasta is. And it's something that I feel like they victimized her way too much. And Jocasta, ever since Quesada got back on the book and he started doing this thing where Tony had therapy sessions with it, was just being written poorly and not written like her. Tony had to put on like headgear to make it seem like Jocasta is a real person, but then he over-sexualizes her, and now you're saying that she was raped, and it just feels very insulting in the same way that the Sons of Yinsen feel very Asian stereotypical insulting. And I feel like if anyone had a problem with Iron Man comics, I feel like Frank Tieri's run is the perfect distillation of everything in Iron Man comics that inherently people find distasteful. And the Jocasta thing is a big part of it, the Sons of Yinsen thing is a big part of it, and the characterization of Tony as a power-hungry businessman is part of it. And so I don't like any of that. And then the Ultron stuff just feels so tacked on because we didn't need that. The Mask and the Iron Man story arc by itself was interesting, and we didn't need to convert it into something like Ultron. I think doing that diminishes what that story was trying to say, and even more so, just feels like poor shock value. And so by the end of this, it's really bad, and I wouldn't recommend starting this run at all because everything bleeds into the next thing, and you can't just read the Remote Control arc because it plays into the Big Bang Theory arc, and you can't just read that because it plays into the Sons of Yinsen stuff, which you need the Joe Quesada stuff for, and it's a big mess, and if you can skip it, go ahead and skip it. The final issue, issue 49, is a silent issue where Tony fights Radioactive Man, and that's fine, it's kind of interesting. Bendis would eventually do a silent Daredevil issue, which is far superior, because here it feels like it's cheating in places, where it's using more panels than it needs to get you to a certain idea, mainly because the art is so bad. It's so early 2000s, anime inspired, and so horribly done, which, by the way, has nothing to do with anime. Anime is fine. If you want to copy anime art, cool. But they've done it so poorly that it ruins it. The art here is just so poorly laid out that the story without dialogue thing just doesn't work for it. So overall, Frank Tieri's run is not very good. I think there's lots of potential in it. I think it starts strong and then crashes and burns very quickly. And if you had to read anything of Iron Man between issues 26 to 49, just read 26 to 30. Just read the sentient armor stuff and then go ahead and skip everything else. It's just not very good. But that's the end of that era. I'll be back with you next time to do more reviews, and more specifically, the next time I talk about Iron Man, I'm going to be talking about the Mike Grell Iron Man run that he both wrote and drew. So thanks everybody for watching. Let me know what you think in the comments, whether you agree or disagree with anything I said, and I'll see you next time.